Welcome to the Really Useful Podcast. I'm Christian Corley, and with me this week is my Make Use of colleague, James Frew. Hi, James. How are you?
Hey, Christian. Yeah, I'm good, thanks. You had a good weekend?
Yes, I was learning how to write a sitcom at the weekend.
Oh, that's pretty cool. That's very different. Bit different from our usual technology writing.
Absolutely, yeah. It was up in Newcastle. It was with a guy called Bennett Aaron, who's a scriptwriter in the UK. It was learned some interesting things. Bits of it I knew already. I think it's helped crystallise things and put things into perspective and shape and context that I didn't see out from reading endless books on the subject. What about you? What do you do?
I just had a bit of a relaxing weekend, actually, because this is linked into something we're going to talk about on the podcast. Was last weekend I was still in Germany covering IFA for the site for Make Use of.
Yeah.
So this is my first weekend off. We were very busy while we were there, so it was nice to just catch up for a couple of days, have a bit of a rest.
Sure.
Yeah, it was nice.
Okay, well, let's move on then into that. In this week's Really Useful Podcast, we're going to be finding out what was spotted at IFA that James thinks will be something to think about buying in the next few months or next year. We'll also be investigating whether or not Huawei's products can spy on Americans, or anyone else for that matter, and a new Google Photos feature that helps you relive your memories. We've got some tips for you as well, how to clean your AirPods and AirPod case, what kind of online accounts are being sold on the dark web, what apps you can use to email email newsletters and, if necessary, unsubscribe, and what is the Windows tech support scam, what do you need to know about it, and, should you even bother answering the phone to these people? So James Frew, you went to what we discovered last week, everybody. It's called IFA and not IFA, over in Berlin.
I did. So I was calling it IFA for the longest time as well. It's because it stands for something, but obviously it's in German, and the I is normally pronounced E or something along those lines, so IFA. So yeah, as you talked about with Ben last week, it's very similar to CES, which happens in January, except its focus isn't predominantly on press. It's on regular consumers. So you can buy a ticket and head in there as a regular person. You don't have to have a press pass or anything. They do have 2 press days, though, where they announce new products and that kind of stuff. But it's more geared at letting you see what you can actually go and buy right now. And most product launches, if they do happen, are available straight away. So CES is more like future tech. These are the things that we're working on. IFA is more like you can go and buy this right now.
Okay.
So we did see a lot of very cool things. Obviously, there was a lot of what you've come to expect from consumer tech. So headphones, speakers, smart home stuff, that kind of thing. But some of the products that got us particularly hyped were the more unusual ones, I would say. From my perspective, my favorite thing that I saw while we were there was this thing called the Shift phone, which is made by a German company called Shift. And if you've heard of, actually, I'll take that another way. Smartphones aren't particularly ethical or sustainable. So from whether the materials are sourced from sort of conflict areas, usually in Africa or Asia, even down to their production. So often in China, possibly in poor working conditions. So the whole industry is kind of built on that. And so for those of us that are kind of more interested in ethical technology, I suppose, there's not really been many options. There's been the Fairphone, which is also good, but it has limited availability, and the reviews of the first 2 units were a bit iffy. So Shift phone is similar. It's meant to be a modular, repairable, sustainable phone. So the whole idea of it is that it is sourced in a more eco-friendly way. The materials are from more, conflict-free areas where possible. It's not always going to be the case. But it was really interesting to see this phone in person. So the Fairphone is made with the idea that it needs to be a mainstream device that they can pump out quite a lot of. The Shift phone has a different angle. It wants to stick to its principles more than be a mainstream device, I would probably say is how it's going. So it focuses on low quantity production, but everything is done ethically. And the most interesting thing when you first see the phone is that you can actually take off all the bits. So a few years ago, you would have been able to take out the battery to your smartphone. You pretty much can't do that now, but you can do that on the Shift phone. You just take the back off, take the battery out, and then you can get straight to the motherboard. There's nothing between you and the electronics inside. But the most interesting thing is the screen. So we've got an article on the Shift phone specifically from IFA, but we also have a roundup of the best of IFA. And you can see pictures of this. But you can detach the screen just by pressing on the sides, even when the phone is still running. And it allows you to get behind. So it's only connected by a ribbon. There's no soldering. There's nothing keeping it in place, no glue. And the components, so things like the camera and the buttons, aren't soldered into place either. They're clipped. So you can take them out while the phone is still running. So it's not hard to replace. If you were worried about privacy, for example, you can just open the front of the phone off and take out the camera. I mean, it's hard for me to describe in words just how awesome it was to see something like this, because it's very rare that you get something that's not just marketing for this kind of thing. You know, lots of brands use the word ethical or eco-friendly or environmentally friendly or whatever, but they're not, or it's a very small part of the device. But this is built into the entire company. Started by two brothers. They live in a really small village in the middle of Germany. It's kind of like a commune almost. You know, they've redeveloped a house so that all the office can be in there, and they have their own community garden where they grow things. They live the lifestyle that they project with the phone too. And I think that's quite important to understand the motivations of the people that are creating the device. But so that was my favorite thing at IFA, I think.
Yeah, that's a fascinating thing. It's been around for a few years, hasn't it? Am I right in thinking it's an Android?
It is an Android-based
iOS
phone. Yeah. So they have their own version of Android called Shift OS, but it's predominantly de-Googled Android, really.
Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, can that go mainstream, do you think?
Their ambition isn't to make it mainstream. I think they want it to stick to the people that are really enthused by this idea. Because if they expand too far, they kind of move into Fairphone territory, which is doing the sustainable business model, but you do have to make compromises, obviously. So you need to have the right production quantities. You're going to need to have suppliers ordering things. You know, it becomes a lot harder for them to be in control of their production process. Personally, I think it's a really well-designed device that doesn't feel like you're making any compromises to have an ethical device. And I think that's the most important part about it. And they don't have any outside investors either. So the first time around, I can't remember how they financed that was it. They crowdsourced the first device, and then every subsequent device has only been funded by pre-orders. So it means that they know exactly how many they need to make, and they also already have the money coming in. So there's no one influencing what they choose to do either. I think I was really floored by the whole thing. Like, you know, with us being in technology and technology writing, although some headphones do excite me, predominantly, you know, a headphone's a headphone. And for the most part, smartphones have become smartphones. They're all quite similar. So to get to see something like this, where not only is it well designed, it's very well thought through, and they are trying to make a difference with their business model, I was blown away by it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I'm not entirely convinced by this whole mainstream thing. I mean, we've got the Librem 5 phone coming out imminently, and you know that's not going to be a mainstream phone.
No.
However much fans of open source might want it to be. So yeah, I'm not convinced by that whole take on it, but I am really fascinated by the smart Shift. Thank you. Shift phone. Yeah. Smartphone's been done already. Okay, so I mean, was that the only thing that you enjoyed, or was there anything else that could come along and disrupt things?
Nothing that hit me quite as hard as that, but there were some cool products there too. We saw the launch of Fossil's new smartwatches. So they run Android Wear OS, or Google's, you know, Wear platform. Yep. They Android-based smartwatches have kind of had a bit of an issue in the market. You know, they've not really found their footing. And Fossil is pretty much the only company that really still puts a lot of effort in. And they are really nice devices. You know, they look good, they feel good, they run good hardware. If you're looking for slightly less expensive alternative to something like the Apple Watch, then they're a really good choice. One of the other things that I was quite keen to see was because we were in Germany, there were a lot of German household appliance manufacturers there.
Yeah.
And Miele is one of the most notable in the country, and they're known for very high quality white goods, so things like refrigerators, washing machines, that kind of thing. And they also do kitchen appliances. But they've recently taken an angle to move into the smart kitchen, so connected devices. And me and Joe Coburn, who is also a writer for Make Use Of, we went to go and look at their display and demo of the smart kitchen, and it was absolutely incredible. Smart devices are cool in principle, but often they don't work well with each other. Mm-hmm. Or you can't see the use case for having this particular device over that one and whatever it is. And this was a demonstration of an induction cooker that is controlled by an app, will get up to the precise temperature settings, also has built-in recipes so that it knows how long things need to cook for, how long the hot oven needs to be on for, that kind of thing. So that's the first sort of connected bit. So it connects to an app on your phone and then the cooker itself, which can be controlled by the app. Right. But then the most incredible thing was they've got this, I guess you call it a cooker hood, the extractor fan thing.
Yeah.
And it sits on top of, it's connected on top of above the cooker. And when you start cooking, it goes, oh, I know what type of food you're cooking and I know what temperature it's on. So I will automatically start the fan at a particular setting to optimize the extraction so that it doesn't interfere with. And that was just incredible. And not only was this thing really smart, but it looked amazing too. It was like a little egg thing that when it turns on, the sides part a little bit, kind of like an egg cracking. And then it has smart lighting inside, which you can control through the app too. So the whole thing is a brilliant example of something that was really well thought through and well designed and worked just seamlessly. It was perfect. I was really impressed by that.
Wow. Cool. The kitchen of the future. Okay. All right. So there's far more material about the IFA event on makeuseof.com where you can you would follow the show notes below. As with every other item in this podcast, we will tell you where to go to find out more. We're going to move on now to Huawei, who have been at the center of attention for quite a while, especially in the United States and Europe, but actually it seems that their notoriety in having questionable attitudes towards either domestic or industrial espionage seems to extend also into Africa. We've been looking at whether or not it's safe to use them, whether they're spying on Americans. They made a keynote speech at IFA 2019. Did you catch this?
I didn't go, but I think it was Canon that attended that one. Sure.
And they have a new facial recognition system in the Kirin 995G, and which is a new chip for their new smartphones and routers. But I mean, really, everywhere Huawei goes, there's this kind of circus now of whether on as a state company, a Chinese state company, are they legitimate? Are they safe to use? Are they, there's the United States are apparently pressuring the UK not to use Huawei for 5G network, for instance. Do you want to expand on this, James?
Yeah, so earlier, I think it was 2018, if you've been paying attention to the US political situation at all, you'll see that the US and China have been increasingly turning up the heat on their trade war. So they started with essentially Americans used to produce a lot of their own goods, and over time that production has shifted to China. It's led to a reduction in jobs and manufacturing in the United States, and something which the country rightly used to pride itself on. As a result of that, there's a sort of protectionist streak happening in the US, which is we want manufacturing to come back here, but obviously it is cheaper in China. So companies choose to manufacture in China. And as a result of that, the Trump administration started getting in a bit of a trade spat with China, imposing tariffs. And the focal point of this became Huawei, which is currently one of the largest mobile phone manufacturers in the world. And this kind of happened at the same time that it shipped more devices than Apple did. So Apple is obviously one of the wealthiest, largest companies in the entire world, and it is American. But Huawei is currently selling more smartphones than Apple. And just around that time, the trade dispute was kicking off, and then Huawei kind of ended up in the mix a little bit as the focal point of this trade dispute between the two countries. And it led to the US saying, you can't use any of our services. We're going to ban Huawei products from the US. Even our companies can't trade with them and that kind of thing. And it was a big problem because Google makes most of its money from licensing Android to handset manufacturers and selling their services and things like that. And Huawei, being the largest smartphone manufacturer running Android, is obviously a large customer. So then it gets quite messy because you're then penalizing an American company too. And the whole situation is quite complex, really. And the focal point for the issue with Huawei is that they have this capability to send data back to China. And that's seen as bad. And in theory, it is bad. I think both myself and you, Christian, are big privacy advocates. We don't like the idea of people being able to take our data and kind of secretly store it anywhere or spy on us. We like things to be quite transparent. And so that is a problem. But how much of a problem it is and how different that is to any other Chinese company, or for that matter, any American company, is still kind of up for debate and kind of depends on your perspective of the situation.
I think probably, I mean, this is extrapolating things considerably down the line a bit, but I think really the only difference is that if it is by a company that is registered where you in your country, then you at least have some chance of legal recourse. Whereas if it's a company that's, a Chinese company or whatever, then that is probably a far more remote possibility than it already is. I think that's pretty much the dividing line.
But then why does Huawei get most of the issue there?
Indeed, yeah.
Because, so for anyone that's not familiar with China's policies, the Chinese government is reasonably authoritarian and they like to be in control of all the data. And
no, I think they're unreasonably authoritarian, to be honest with you.
Yes, yeah. That's probably a better way of phrasing it. But they like to be in control of all the data that flows through the country and have ultimate control over it. So in theory, the issues that have been raised with Huawei and privacy and the legitimacy of data and spying could apply to any Chinese company that operates outside of China. Operates inside of China too, but this is predominantly an issue for the rest of the world versus China. So that's why I mentioned the whole smartphone shipments thing earlier, because that seems to be the most likely reason that Huawei is getting so much of the flack for this particular problem, because it's true of every Chinese company. And so if you don't like the idea of Huawei spying on you, you can't really use any Chinese product either, because they're all going to have the same problem.
Yeah. It's a fascinating thing. I mean, if you don't want to be spied upon at all, then you're probably using the wrong phone. It's just a guess. Or tablet. You're probably using the wrong one. Maybe I mentioned the Librem 5 earlier. Maybe head to the Purism website. I think it's puri.sm, and find out a bit more about the products that they have on offer in their product range, which you got to in a rather roundabout way. Let's go for something a little jollier, which is Google Photos now helps you relive your memories. It's a new feature called Memories. These use a stories format. God, do you know what? I hate stories on Facebook. God, oh, it's such an irritating thing. That's for another time, though. So, yeah, you can use the Google Photos Memories and feature, which is designed to, as Google say, put your memories front and center in Google Photos. with your media quote again privately presented to you, so you can sit back and enjoy some of your best moments. Which I mean, for that seems a little bit narcissistic for me. But yeah, so basically, I mean, Google Photos has gone from strength to strength over the past few months. I've certainly found myself looking, using it in a slightly different way as they've revised the user interface. They've also changed how the assistant creates movies as well, and rather than give you kind of an open-ended movie feature, it's now kind of themed movies, all set to particular things. So if I click assistant now, and then if I click movie, then it gives me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 options for a movie, whereas before it was a lot more open-ended, and you can select the bits that you choose. Now then, let's just try this out then. Memories. Yeah, it's a weird one. Because what I'm seeing are yeah, I think they need to work on this. I'm seeing screenshots from Android apps and and footage of me building a PC for a Make Use of article.
Well, I mean, it's very on topic, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, yeah.
On brand.
So yeah, I suppose. I mean, the thing about that is that it's full of pictures of my children. In addition, and none of them have popped up in any of these memories.
Yeah. So this kind of brings up an interesting point about how. So this is essentially like you've probably heard of the app Time Hop. It reminds you of things that happened in the past, memories that you've created basically from photos and videos.
Sure.
And this feature has then jumped into social media, so it's now part of Facebook. There's a whole memories section. Google Photos is implementing it, and we're likely to see it in more places too. But because they're automatically generated, it does kind of make you wonder what's the algorithm behind it that's generating those things, and how does it decide, and are there ways to exclude certain things, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Because Facebook gets in quite a lot of trouble with this feature for saying, oh, surprise, you've got a memory today. You go and click on it, and it's something you'd rather not remember. So say you've posted about the passing of a family member or something bad that happened in your life.
Sure.
And those are events you don't want to necessarily have thrown up in your face every year as a reminder. And there's currently not really any way to modify what it shows you. Facebook has kind of done a little bit to try and make it not go like to look for keywords and particular things so that it's not showing you the worst things. But there's still no particular option for you to say, I don't want to see this type of thing. So it's not a very helpful feature for, say, Christian, who's just looked at his memories and seen a bunch of screenshots when, it could have been one of his kids' birthdays or something like that he'd rather remember.
Yeah.
And it does make you wonder if we're going to become reliant on these technologies to remind us of things that happened in the past and to kind of become our memory, if you like, they kind of need to be a bit more transparent about how they're shaping how we view the past.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. Yeah, absolutely. There's obviously work to do on that app, but I look forward to using it more in future. Let us move on to AirPods. Do you know, I get to this. I'm basically at the stage where, apart from these beauties up here, which obviously don't go into my ear, when it comes to in-ear listening, I'm at a stage where I basically just discard them every 12 months and buy a new set. Because AirPods and similar in-ear earphones do get dirty.
Yeah.
Which is quite kind of why Brent Dirk's article on cleaning your AirPods is kind of welcome, because it's important to know that they're not water resistant. Virtually no earphone is water resistant because there's there's little bits of electronics in there, and it's not all none of it's waterproof basically. Now he suggests using some microfiber cloths, and that's that bit makes sense. And some electronic safe cleaning formula is also a good idea. But the big problem with these things is the earwax, and I hope you're not, listening to this munching on your breakfast bagel or anything, because earwax is a problem. And if you are listening to this much on your breakfast bagel, perhaps you're listening to this on a headset, and it's just hit home what is happening in your ears as you chew, because earwax is loosened as your jaw moves. And sticking things in your ears is an unnatural way of getting earwax out. That's not the way you're supposed to do it. Now, it can be cleaned, obviously, but I mean, it is quite gruesome, and this is why I basically change my earphones every 12 months or so, even like replacing, you can take off the little rubber sheath and like bang it on the table and stuff and scrape, get the gunky bits out. But they aren't nice, really, are they?
No, there's something a bit unpleasant about the whole thing.
Yeah.
And because you can't wash them, you're kind of having to manually clean it. And earwax is one of those things where it can be a bit sticky or it can harden on the device. So it's a bit hard and tricky to properly clean.
Yeah. There's, cleaning the case is also important, and there is a useful tool that Brent highlights called the Full Circle Control Alt Clean set, which is worth looking at. Now, I think if you're an EarPod user or you use in-ear headphones, then taking a look at this article and going through the various steps to make sure that your earphones are clean and hygienic. Because as James says, it does get a bit, it's pretty disgusting. It does get a bit claggy, and also, it's not hygienic, and you don't want to be sticking things that aren't clean in your ears, do you?
No, absolutely
not. No. I'm not a doctor, but I've heard that kind of activity is not safe.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anything you want to add to that?
No, I agree. Some headphones that I've bought, in-ear headphones I've bought in the past, come with this little scraping tool. So it's kind of a little metal ring that you can run around the inside. Obviously, it's not going to work for what are they called? AirPods. It's more for the ones which have the little rubber bungs that you can stick directly inside your ear. Now, if you're looking at this thinking, this all sounds kind of grim, I'd rather not put things in my ear, you can either go for over-ear headphones, like both Christian and I are wearing to record this, or something which I did see at IFA is the Jabra 65T and the 75T, which will be out later this year. They sit flush to your ear rather than inside, so they'll get a little bit of grime on it, but it's not like you're sticking it into the ear canal and picking up all the wax. So they try and just sort of sit flat, so you're not getting some of that more gruesome stuff.
Do they have some kind of special way of not falling out then?
Yeah, I tried them on actually. The whole thing has been really well designed. They've got a little curve just at the top that sits it in the I didn't think I'd be talking about ear biology today. The little bit where you can sit. Old headphones used to have grips that you could sit inside the sort of the circle of your ear. You know, just above your eardrum, you've got that little groove.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they've got a groove on the device which sort of sit into that.
Right. Okay.
So most true wireless headphones just try and push into your ears, whereas these try and hook on, so they don't have to go in instead. Right.
Okay. I think I like the sound of that. Yeah. That sounds cleaner at least.
Yes.
Okay. That's not what we did. Where did that come from? That's not what we're doing. What's going on here? Okay. We're not doing that. That was months ago. Crikey. No, that's not it either. What's going on here? Here we go. Shocking online accounts that are sold on the dark web. If you don't know what the dark web is, it's a kind of seedy underbelly of the internet. Long time ago, the internet was the web, I should say, and the internet as well, was lots and lots of sites, very much in a kind of a linear sort of sense. But with the, I think that the emergence of Google and Facebook have kind of made the web more of a hierarchy.
Yeah.
Talking kind of loosely here, but there is more of a hierarchy to the web now than there was. And some of the sites that would have been easy to find 10 years ago or 20 years ago are a lot tougher to find now. There's a thing called the dark web, which is where kind of crime takes place, criminal activities. in addition to completely innocent stuff as well. But identities are traded on the dark web, for instance, and we've had a look at 8 examples of the types of personal account that are sold on the dark web. So we're talking about financial and personal accounts, email accounts, dating profiles, Netflix accounts even that have been compromised, adult website accounts, airline accounts, PayPal accounts, and even gaming accounts, which is Fortnite. There's a variety of different ways in which scammers can use these details to steal your identity, rob you, get free flights, various ways. Even use them to scam other people as well. James, the dark web. There's not really an awful lot that can be done about the dark web other than what's already happened, I think, is there? Because once one method of subduing it is implemented, it's just, servers are just going to pop up with their data routed from other sources.
So I think, so the dark web, if you imagine the early internet was kind of like your street, and everybody has a house and an address, but you don't necessarily know who is at each address. So you'd have to go to each one to go and find out. And then search engines like Google popped up, and they went, "Oh, we'll tell you. We'll make an address book, and we'll be your sort of guide to all the addresses around you."
Yeah.
And that became what we now think of as the internet. But outside of that, you can choose not to be in this indexed version of the internet. So, you can have an address that still exists, but nobody might know about it. And that's kind of what these dark web websites are. So they're not something necessarily different. They operate in the same way. You just can't find them as easily. And so all of the data is still served on regular servers and in normal places like that. It's just if you use Google, you can't find it. So you have to know where it is before you can go looking. So, yeah, like you said, it's completely right to think that if one site gets shut down, then someone will create another one and the data can just be moved across. This is something that's been going on for a while, this kind of whack-a-mole. So even in the mid 2000s, you had this with torrent websites like the Pirate Bay, which is the most infamous example. And every time a country or a law enforcement agency would close down one server, they'd go, okay, we'll move it to a different country or a different domain or a different thing. And the Pirate Bay is still going, despite being completely illegal pretty much everywhere, certainly in Europe. But you can still find the Pirate Bay. Not that you should, but you can. And it's the exact same thing with these. So we use a different terminology for these sites that are kind of invisible to search engines. But the same thing will happen, if we close one down, they'll just open somewhere else.
Yeah, you'd actually need to know the address of the sites in order to access them.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are accessed via Tor, aren't they, as well?
Yes. So they're onion websites. So that's accessible through the Tor network.
Yeah, which basically routes your path through the internet through many servers, so it's more or less impossible to trace.
Yeah.
Where you've been, where you're doing it.
Probably not totally impossible.
Not totally impossible,
no,
probably not.
No.
It would seem, based on reports from alphabet agencies, that it's not absolutely impossible. Yeah.
Yes.
So just difficult. Yeah. So staying safe from the dark web market of accounts. I think the best way to do it to make sure you are maintaining a mature, sensible, secure password policy.
Oh, I suppose we should say the data that's being traded here is most likely from the regular internet. It comes from hacks and data breaches and that kind of stuff. Yeah. So to prevent your stuff being found on these websites, you need to, like Christian said, you need to stay secure on the regular websites. So, password managers, making sure you don't expose too much personal information online, always using a VPN, especially on public Wi-Fi, that kind of thing.
Yes, absolutely. You'll find the link to that article, 8 shocking online accounts sold on the dark web, in the show notes, and all the steps that you need to take to prevent your data from being traded on the dark web. Because if you do find, this almost segues, you might find that you're receiving spam, or you might if you're getting spammed another way from inadvertently signing up to email newsletters, you might have clicked OK to some apparently amazing internet offer, input your email address and realize it was an absolute sham, and then they've got your email address and they start sending you marketing emails and stuff. Newsletters are a pain in the backside. Some are great, they make use of newsletters great, for example. Indeed. Whereas others, and that's not the only one I would endorse, there are newsletters that are frustrating. There's a Discworld newsletter. I think I still get it, but it always goes into spam, which is really frustrating because it's the only newsletter that I regularly
want to read
when it comes in. Yeah, so frustrating. I think it's because they send it in plain text.
Right.
And it just ends up straight into spam. So obviously I forget about it, and then I check my spam folder, and I find that there's 6 issues of it that I'm behind. So that's really frustrating. I digress. So there are various ways you can deal with email newsletters that you don't want to be receiving, and we've taken a look recently at various mobile and web apps that you can use to deal with these. On Android and iOS, the tool's called Stoop, which is a dedicated newsletter reader app, which will let you. It's kind of described here as a fresh take on traditional RSS readers, giving you a news digest instead of constant drips of information. Think of it as an inbox dedicated to newsletters. So that's obviously a useful approach to take. Alternatively, you could use CleanFox, which deletes newsletters for carbon offsets, which I think is probably a little bit tenuous, but the fact that it does the job is quite cool. There's also some useful tools such as Leave Me Alone. There is Inbox Kitten and Subscription Zero, which I've used, which deals with automated newsletter unsubscription. Do they unsubscribe? They don't desubscribe you, do they? No, they unsubscribe.
No, probably not. Yeah.
What's your thought on newsletters, James?
This is slightly less of an issue for those of us in Europe since last year, with the implementation of GDPR, which required everyone to get our express consent in order to send us things. And so anyone in Europe or covered by the GDPR is probably seeing their sort of junk mail reduced quite a lot since then. But obviously that's not the case around the world. And so while I've spent the last year sort of using GDPR as a way to bounce all of these things back and declutter my emails, that's not everybody has that right. So these are a great idea. I would add that Gmail actually has an inbuilt feature to do not as powerful as these. Like if you've got lots of newsletters that you need to manage and that kind of thing, these are great. But if you've got an occasional thing, Gmail is actually able to identify where it's come from a mailing list, and it gives you a little tag at the top that says, do you want to unsubscribe for this? And it will send an unsubscribe request on your behalf without you having to do it. And I think may even put them into spam from then on for your account. I can't remember expressly. But so Gmail can handle some of this. But if you want a more powerful option, then these are great. I think you mentioned about the CleanFox, the carbon offsets. I think the link there isn't that they're saying we will do carbon offsets on your behalf. It's by cutting down your email quantity, you are reducing the environmental impact of the internet. I mean, it is going to be an enormously tiny fraction that you're saving there, but every little helps.
Yeah, I'm still not immediately convinced by that because of the power. I don't think there's enough. Like you said, there's not an enormous variation in how much power a server's going to use and the space that's been managed and all that sort of thing. It's a nice idea. I think there's maybe a different way that they could maybe promote an environmental take on that. I'm not taking consultancies at the moment, though, CleanFox, so don't ask me. Okay, let's move on to the Windows Tech Support scam. Now, this is something that's been going on for years and years and years and years. I remember when I was, 13, 14, 15 years ago, I worked for the UK's health service in IT, and we were getting calls from, and the portion I worked for had sites all across the northeast of England. So we would get calls from places like 50, 60 miles away saying that they just had a call from Microsoft. And no, you haven't. And then the scammers started calling us directly to our help desk, which was kind of amusing in many ways. The Windows Tech Support scam has been going on for years. It's basically an attempt by someone over the telephone to gain illegal access to your computer in order to fix a made-up problem, which you then pay for immediately, or deliver some kind of malware, Trojan software to your computer by using your kind of innocence and ignorance over how your computer works. We've looked at it a few times. I've even recorded a call with a scammer some years ago, which is on YouTube, which we've included in several articles. This was a little bit playing in the background.
You said a run bot?
Just trying to remember when this actually happened.
What, is this a box with legs? What are you talking about?
Yeah, it's 3 or 4 years ago I recorded this.
I'm not a technician, no. I don't know what you're talking about, I'm afraid.
In which I kept this person hanging on when I pretended I didn't know what I was doing so that they could go through the whole thing with me so I could record it and see exactly what happens. The thing is about this, basically what happens is they target mainly Windows users, or almost only Windows users, because it's the largest market segment. They will then give you instructions on how to check something, typically, which is opening the Windows Event Viewer, which they then tell you says a particular thing, which it will do, because they know what the Windows Event Viewer is likely to say. And the Windows Event Viewer has very little to do with checking for viruses, which is why they're calling. And it's then a case of them talking you through installing a remote access tool, them then taking control of your computer, and that's when the trouble starts. Now, I'm sure you must have had one of these calls, James.
I've not had a Windows one, but I do get a lot of scam calls about car accidents. This is a particular one that happens in the moment. And they try and convince you that they know information about something that's happened to you so that you will continue with the call and give them information and blah, blah, blah. Sure. And it's a really similar thing with this. It's kind of based around social engineering. So like we were saying with the accounts that get hacked and go onto the dark web, if someone gets your email address and name and phone number, that's not very much information to go on. But if you pick up the call and they say, "Hello, Christian, we've heard you've got a problem with your computer," you immediately feel like, oh, they know me, that this must be real, because they know who I am, they knew my phone number, and they know that I've got a computer. Like, okay, I feel like I trust this person. And that's kind of their entry point to you letting them continue. Yeah. And then they make guesses on other stuff. So then they'll say like, "Oh, I know that you've had a problem with your Windows computer or your laptop." And people go, "Oh, I do have a Windows computer or a laptop. I mean, that's really good." And they sort of try to guess what might be the problem. It's a bit like these sketches about psychics and mediums, who go, "Oh, I've heard you've got a person in your past and their name began with T," and then you fill in the gap and you go, "Oh yeah, Theo. Yeah, I knew Theo." And it's sort of convincing yourself that they know more about you than they really do.
Yeah, that's basically it. Another thing is, obviously, it's nonsense. It's complete nonsense. It's a waste of your time. They're trying to make a lot of money out of you in a completely illegal way. The scammers are often aggressive and pushy. They've been described as sleazy by some commenters to make use of. There's been threats and reports of violence and doxing, admittedly unsubstantiated, but and this is against people who sort of like called them out, hung them up, had an argument with them on the phone. And I think the best solution for this is basically just to hang up. Yeah. Now there's this whole attitude to, well, if I hang up, they're just going to ring someone else. Well, if everyone hangs up, then that's the end of their business. That kills it. So, use call blockers if they're calling you on mobile. There's one built into Android. And if they're ringing a landline, just hang up. I think it's the safest calmest, less distressing way to deal with these calls.
Yeah, and I think that applies to all scam calls, actually. I mean, the Windows ones are quite easy to identify because as soon as they ring up and say, "I've got a problem," you've got a problem with your computer, you can go, "Oh, okay, this is this type of scam." But if you get an unsolicited call from anyone claiming to be anything that's about your personal information, your data, your finances, anything like that, the best bet really is to just put down the phone. And if it's, say, from your bank and they go, "Oh, we've got this problem, you need to give us all your details," put down the phone and say, "I'm going to ring you back," and find the legitimate number and ring them back. And then you can prove to yourself, like, this is the real company that I am speaking to, and I know that, it's verifiable. Yeah. So if you get calls that you're uncertain of, I would just hang them up anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the banking ones, where they claim to be from your bank, they're tricky to deal with. They're easy to deal with, I should say, because you can easily ring your bank and say, "Have you called me?" They have your phone number in most cases. Microsoft don't have your phone number.
Well, they may do in your Microsoft account, but they won't call you.
They won't call you from it. Yeah.
There's very. I can't think of a legitimate scenario where Microsoft would be calling you.
Unless you work for Microsoft and you've taken a day off.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's the only one I can think of. Okay. Well, do you know what? That wraps up this week's really useful podcast, in which we've spoken about some of the best things at IFA that might crystallize into interesting devices in the future, whether Huawei are trustworthy or not. Google Photos Memories feature, how to clean AirPods and other in-ear earphones, online accounts that are sold on the dark web, how to manage your newsletters and unsubscribe to the ones that you don't want, and the Windows tech support telephone scam. The really useful podcast is the tech podcast for technophobes. If you know anyone who would benefit from the hints and tips that we give, the clarity that we hopefully deliver to the world of using technology, which permeates our every waking moment, certainly in the Western world, put them in our direction. We're on iTunes, Spotify, Transistor, and also Stitcher, and pretty much anywhere else you can find a podcast to listen to today. Oh, and we're on YouTube as well. James Frew, thanks for joining us this week on the Really Useful Podcast.
Cheers, thanks, Christian.
And to you, dear listener, we will be back next week with another show. Until then, it's goodbye.